So now we're at this point in the scriptures here in this area where so Sodom and Gomorrah have been destroyed, and now Sarah is realizes that she's conceived and they're gonna have the baby, and so
and she giggles.
now she does.
She names the baby Giggles.
Yep. And it's funny because it was the same thing, but even before that, Abraham laughed as well earlier, and then she laughed as well, but she denies it. He didn't. She does. She conceives in the midst of everything. Her maybe sort of, if you want to call it jealousy, starts on because now Ishmael is now like 13 years old now by the time that Isaac is born, and she kind of gets jealous of just seeing the two play together and get along together, and she gets upset and orders Abraham to send the two of them away, of which Abraham, it was his child. He was upset about it. He didn't want to do that, but God again reminded him that they'd be okay. He's going to have the same promises, like you said. He's going to have a promise. He's going to be numerous. He's going to be a father of many nations, and so he reminds him of that promise, and so he agrees to go ahead and send them off, and realizes that Isaac will be. I mean, it was through God's promise to Abraham, saying that the descendants are going to come through Isaac, not through Ishmael. But don't think that Ishmael's not going to have. He's going to have them, but Isaac's going to be mostly for your main thing. And so with that promise, he agrees to send them out and to go on, and they go on, and then we get into probably one of the most touching stories when Abraham is, if you want to call it, put to a test, where he is called to basically sacrifice his son. And I could read this many, many times, and many, many times, if I was put in that position, if I had a son, I don't know that I could be as faithful. And I'm just being honest. I don't know that I could be as faithful as Abraham in that sense, because this was his literally one and only son to go through. But it just the testing for me is like that's a really hard test. But go ahead.
I think I hear what you're saying, and I certainly resonate in terms of my love for my children. And I think it's important to understand that parents lived with children differently in the ancient world, in part because of infant mortality. Kids died all the time. And so they lived with it differently. The test is horrid from our perspective. And the question needs to be asked, was it more horrid than the test that came in chapter 12? When God said, leave your home, leave your family, leave everything you know, and go where I will lead you. Yes, killing a child is horrid. Please don't hear me say anything other than that. But from in Abraham's world, what is the fundamental test is, do I trust the one that gave me the promise, or do I trust what I think is the fulfillment of the promise? And in that sense, it's the same thing. Because Abraham in chapter 12 believed God had led them to earth, to that area, and believed that his family was the way to live out his life and his faithfulness. And suddenly he's told, leave that. The question is, do I trust God? Or do I trust what I think God has given me?
No, and that's really, really important. I think that's the point that we see here is, no matter what was going on, Abraham trusted God. We don't see him questioning in this point. You don't see Abraham saying, he doesn't go through bargaining or treating like he doesn't like he did for the people. It's a different side of Abraham, like now, and maybe at this point he has grown in his faith. He realizes he's got his trust going. His faith is stronger. He realized God is the one who can provide for him and will, and that if he has that promise, that God would make a way for things to happen. And when you think about it, though, and I think you have to realize at this point too, is Isaac is old enough to know what's going on. I mean, because he asked his father, "Where's the sacrifice?" I mean, he was literally old enough to carry the wood for a sacrifice, so he wasn't a little child. He was old enough to realize what was going on, and old enough to know that there should have been a lamb or something to go on this thing, and Abraham just says, God will provide it.
Yeah. I think that Isaac's faith gets brushed over in our reading of this story. It says that Abraham bound Isaac, and there's a whole genre of medieval art around the binding of Isaac, and they show kind of different images of Isaac in that, and most of them show Isaac peaceful. And whether or not I could go as far as Abraham went with my own child, I'd have a great deal of trouble walking with somebody up a hill with wood and saying, excuse me? And then having that person say, stretch out your arms so that I can tie them. And yet he did, apparently. There is no real wrestling.
Right. But throughout, most of us, we know the story that God calls out to Abraham before does things and tells him not to harm Isaac, not to do anything to him. And then they find a ram in the bushes to put the sacrifice on and to do later. And you just often wonder what that moment, besides this, because we don't know the situation, but you often wonder what that moment was like between Abraham and Isaac. But also now, as you said, I mean, you have to have the faith of Isaac now. Abraham has told Isaac, God's going to provide. Isaac sees that God provides the sacrifice for him, for them now, and to see how his faith in God had to have grown as well, knowing in all this sense how all of that would have came through.
One of the other interesting things I think in this is that there are the three great patriarchal cycles in Genesis of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
And there's a huge amount about Abraham's life and what he did, and a huge amount about what Jacob did and about his life. And there's just such a small part of Isaac. And mostly what he did was to redig his father's wells.
Yes.
That's pretty much all he did.
Yeah.
And back to your image of ministry, I think that whether it is pastoral ministry or any other ministry in the life of the community, each of us has a part to play, and it may not be the dominant part of the story. But if Isaac didn't come between Abraham and Jacob, you couldn't get from Abraham to Jacob. And that small bit of faithfulness, of letting himself be bound, of redigging his father's wells, was the faithfulness that he was called to. So I guess it's time to move on to Jacob.
It is. And there's a lot, and forgive us if this is a little bit longer one than normal. There's a lot of information in this section and a lot of things that are going on. But yes, so to cover this area, and we get to Jacob now, and as we move on, as Jacob and Esau are come together, you see the rivalry, so to speak, of in between. It kind of reminded me a lot of Cain and Abel at the very beginning, with this just a different way to think, but you saw the one sacrifice not being accepted. In this case, it was just the opposite. There was a lot of tricksters going on here, if you want to call Jacob that. Well, a lot of people
that's one of the ways to understand the name.
Yeah, is in his sense, because this is as we know the story of Jacob, or Isaac meets Rebekah. They have Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau kind of have a competition amongst them. Jacob being the more
in utero,
yeah, amongst them, there and outside, exactly, both. There's so much going where Jacob tricks Esau into giving him his birthright.
So the famous story of Jacob and Esau and the birthright and the bowl of lentils.
Yes.
I think one of the beauties of reading through Scripture, we get to add something to the sparse narrative that is in front of us. The narrative of this birthright conversation tells us that Esau was hunting. He came back. He says to his brother Jacob, "I'm famished. Give me some of your stew." Jacob then says, "Only if you will give me your birthright." And Esau says, "What's my birthright if I'm going to die?"
Yep.
And Jacob says, "Great," and gets the birthright. Well, the unknown question here is, how hungry was Esau? Do we read this story with a sense of Esau as the teenager, pardon me for any teenagers that happen to be listening, the teenager coming in at the end of the day and saying, "I'm starving to death and there's nothing to eat"? Or has he actually been hunting for a week, run out of food 4 days ago, and not had anything to eat? Well, that really changes how we view Jacob at this point. Because if he's the teenager, then Jacob saying, "Give me your birthright," makes Esau dumb. That he's trading his birthright for a bowl of soup when all he had to do was wait an hour until dinner time. If, on the other hand, Esau is actually starving to death, then trickster is a kind description of Jacob. What he is cruel.
Yes.
And I think we have to wrestle with, how do we understand that? And even within that, how do we, as privileged North Americans, who by and large have never actually been hungry? I've missed meals. I've chosen to go without meals. I've felt hunger, but I've never been stomach gnawing, I don't know where the next bite of food will be, hungry.
Right. And you have to wonder too, in that whole essence, it's like, how much did Esau know? How much did he realize? I mean, did he realize the importance of what that birthright meant? Even though, like, whatever it was, he was hungry enough to give it up. Whatever that, again, like you said, whatever that consists of. But I look at the description, he's like, he ate, drank, got up, and left, showing just how little he thought of his birthright. And you thought, did he not realize, being the firstborn, what that really entailed?
Well, we don't know.
And we don't know.
Again, we don't know what the family conversation was.
Right.
Because, Jacob, Esau, Isaac, and Rebekah presumably had family dinners together of some form or fashion. Right. And they had family conversations. And if you think back, during the pregnancy, Rebecca receives the word, two nations are warring within your womb, and the younger will serve the older. Well, what did she do with that little bit of information? Did she immediately turn to Isaac and say, honey, we're going to have twins, and the younger is the one that matters? And did they then, as a family sitting around the campfire, hear that story over and over again? And did Esau think of himself, sure, I'm the oldest, not that it really matters, and therefore, what the heck, I'll trade it for a bowl of soup? That's a very reasonable way to read the things that are at hand.
Absolutely. So in the means of all these, we see the struggles, we see everything going on, you see the tricking, and then you kind of see Rebecca getting into the same type of situation as there when Jacob asked Esau to provide a meal for him, to go out to kill, to bring a meal, because he knew he for whatever reason, Jacob loved Esau's meals. He loved the game that he got to get.
Isaac.
Yes, sorry, you got it. My bad. Isaac loved Esau's meals, yes. So we see amongst the tricking, the continuing tricking, even to come on Rebecca, that Isaac asked Esau to go and kill game for him, so to speak. In other words, meat. He loved Esau's preparations of meat. He knew Esau evidently knew how to provide it, or how to cook it, how to do everything he needed for it, and Rebecca overhears the conversation, and so she ends up cooking the meal, disguises Jacob. Jacob, in a sense, knows that Isaac will know that it's not him, and she has the plan. She has the plan. I'll speak to put the furry on him so that when he touches him, he knows who it is, and he pulls it off. But even in the midst of the conversations, Isaac even questions, well, you feel like Esau, but you sound like Jacob, in the situations and the thing. But in the whole sense of that cooking, the whole point was that Isaac wanted to offer a blessing to his firstborn, which was Esau. But
again,
yes,
you got to go back.
You got to go back to things.
You got to go back to the angel in the pregnancy.
And I think that's what we should remember.
Is this a trick?
Yep.
Is this Rebecca tricking Isaac, or is this Rebecca saving Isaac from short-circuiting the plan of God?
Yep. Yeah.
And within all of that, I think for us as modern hearers, there is the question that we wrestle with in terms of, wait, can't you bless two children? And I think that what we neglect is what the blessing actually is. It's not. There is a specificity to the blessing. Yes. It says when Isaac blesses Jacob, he says in chapter 27, verses 27 through 29, let nations serve you and rulers bow down to you and become Lord of your brother, and the sons of your father will worship you. Well, that's kind of hard to say to two kids and have it be meaningful.
Right. Rebecca remembers we know she knows that the younger is supposed to be the one that kind of in charge. We remember. But so Esau comes back in after all this is done. They realize that there's been some deceit going on, and all Esau really wants is a blessing, which Isaac does give him a blessing, but it's a very different blessing. By the fact in this one, he says, now you will make a home far away from the olive groves of the earth, far away from the showers of the sky above. You will live by your sword. You will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will tear away his harness from your neck. And then after all this came about, Esau's fears, they send Jacob away.
And that sets us
And
up
that's
for
up
next
for
week.
the next ones, yes. And everything that comes
So
along.
next week we get to talk. We continue talking about Jacob, his travels, and his many children,
Yes.
and multiple wives, and all that has. We hope that you're enjoying these podcasts. I hope that you are continuing to read along, and invite you to come and join us for worship at St. James, and look forward to continuing this journey together.